So hi everybody, this is Graham Mead from the Proceed Group. Welcome to this webinar where we're going to be going through right-sizing your SAP migration, or right-sizing your SAP migration strategy, as in getting your strategy ready for migration. I'm going to let's get to the next page. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of introductions because I've got some guys from Monarch and Black Dog on with me today. Then we'll talk about the joint audit that we're proposing within this presentation, what we're going to go through. We're then going to talk about licensing, which was going to be covered off by David Lloyd from Monarch. Then I'm going to talk about data management and right-sizing for S4 HANA, etc. Then Rob Ashby is going to talk a little bit about infrastructure and application strategy, and then we'll wrap up with what the audit report would look like and how we approach the right-sizing. And then we've got a bit of a Q&A and then close. So that's sort of the structure of today. So moving swiftly on. Okay, so this is sort of my introduction. From the Proceed Group perspective, Proceed Group we're a widely recognised as a SAP experts. Specifically, we're working within archiving, decommissioning, and content management of enterprise systems, specifically in the SAP space. We've been doing this for about 20 years, and we're recognised as the leading specialist in this area. We have obviously quite a few customers around the world, 650 plus. And we have we're headquartered in the UK, we have offices now in US, Belgium, Germany, South Africa, India, and we're opening a new office in Canada as we speak. We have a strong partnership network because obviously we only do this specific piece, and that the strongest partnerships we have, we've just listed there around SAP, obviously, because obviously we're a goal, and I'll talk about our partnership in a moment with SAP. Easy Software, Monarch, who are on the call, BlackDog, who are on the call as well, but also we work with the big hyperscalers and a lot of the infrastructure organizations like T-Systems, etc. From the SAP's perspective, we're SAP Gold Partner. We have a master services agreement with them from the service delivery perspective, and we support a lot of their pre-sales activities. So they put us in to talk about archiving and decommissioning of data. We've done 100 plus customers so far. We've taken to SAP HANA or S4 HANA, and we've saved them significant amounts of pounds in doing that process and the process we go through. A few listed there of some of the customers specifically in the UK that we've been working with or have worked with in the past. Hopefully you'll recognise a few of those, and they're obviously ever growing as we speak, with everybody moving to S4 HANA and HANA, etc. Okay, so that's a bit about Proceed. So I'm going to hand over to Monarch now, just a quick introduction from them.
Thank you very much, Graham, and again, welcome everybody to this session today. My name is David Lloyd. I'm a director of Monarch. We were established in 2008 as a specialist SAP partner, but we have also, during the majority of that time, over 10 years, been a master distributor of the Profile Tailor suite of software. That now includes around 70 plus UK customers, UK and Ireland actually, customers, very similar kind of customer base to what Graham described at Proceed. So the likes of Diageo, Mars, Prince's Foods, Clark's. So as a company, we've been established quite some time, and as a product, we're talking about very mature product set. At the very heart of our products is actually account behavior profiling. So our software at its very core monitors the behavior of SAP, every single SAP account. So not just named users, but also system accounts, comms accounts, RFC accounts. It monitors what transactions they run, how often they run them, what time of day they run them, what IP addresses that they use. And it's constantly building this profile of every single account within your SAP system. And we use that data for a number of things. Firstly, we use it for being able to do GRC type activities, governance, risk and compliance. So we can use that data to cleanse access and authorizations for user accounts. So because we can understand what the capability of an account is by looking at their roles in SAP, we can compare that to what we've learned in their actual behavior and be able to do cleansing based on that and sort of say, okay, well, we can see that David Lloyd has got access to 20 roles, but he's only using a couple of them. So we can vastly reduce down his access and authorizations. So that's one element of where we can use this capability. Secondly, what we're talking about is actually real-time behavior profiling. So not only do we build this picture up over time, but we can directly look in real time what accounts are doing what within SAP. So we use that element to do things like active threat detection and fraud detection. So for instance, if somebody has access to be able to do direct table access in SAP, we can put active monitors in place to check that that kind of access is not being abused. So for instance, nobody's downloading employee data or customer data or partner data from your SAP systems. So again, we're using this profiling to be able to detect that kind of behavior and alert people to it. For the purposes of today, we use that information to also optimize SAP licenses and check for compliance within your SAP agreement. So we will use that information to determine what every single employee does within your SAP landscape. Again, what transactions they run, how much they run of them. And based on that, we can optimize licenses, because generally people have fairly poor joiner, mover, leaver processes. So people collect authorizations and access, and when you give licenses away to start with, they might not need that license in 6 months' time or 6 years' time, and very rarely is there a proper life cycle management of SAP licenses. But it's a massively important thing to do, as I'll detail later on in this session, being able to actually tie up those bits and truly understand license usage and where you stand with compliance. The final area that we use this information is in workload automation, and especially within employee lifecycle automation. So we can detect changes in data of accounts. So we can detect job title changes, department changes, and based on that, we can trigger automated processes such as a new starter process, leaver process to automatically de-roll people, lock their accounts, self-service accounts, emergency access, all these kind of things. So in a nutshell, that's where Grey Monarch sit. And on that note, I will pass over to Rob.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. So Rob Ashby from BlackDog Cloud Technologies. So we're a fairly new kid on the block in terms of what we're trying to do here, but the reason we're joined together today with Proceed and Grey Monarch is to really complete the jigsaw of some of the things we see for customers out in the market today. So and typically licensing, archiving, and also architecture are the three heaviest impacting items to cost. So our organization's all about helping you navigate that, find where those savings are and release them. And a lot of this stuff isn't immediately obvious, but hopefully this audit will help everybody through that. We do a number of other things as well around migrations and technical support, but our focus today is purely on this audit process and saving money across your SAP estate. Okay, on to the next. And I think back to you, Graham.
Great, thanks, Paul. Actually, I'll just skip back one slide. Just page up, 1 moment. Oh, sorry. So yeah, thanks for those intros. Yeah, what we're going to cover off today is that between the three of us, the three areas that we work in or we focus on, we've come up with a joint audit process which provides you with a sort of a clear strategy, business case, whatever you want to call it, to take forward as regards to your strategy to move your estate to S4HANA, to cloud, etc., etc. So it provides you all a full understanding of where to move forward. So how we put this together. So the high level audit process of what we do is as follows. So we obviously gather some data, because obviously that's key for us, for sizing, for understanding of the number of users, etc., depending on what we're looking at, where your estate is, etc. We'll be conducting some virtual workshops certainly these days to dig deep into that information that we gather. We then get a better understanding of your business goals. Where do you want to go? What's your target where you want to take your systems? Document and report the recommendations based on that, and then we obviously would follow that up with a call to see whether you wanted to move forward with the bigger piece of work. So that's the audit service. So it helps us understand and build that strategy, and it obviously then puts you in the right place to give us the recommendations of the areas that we think we could provide benefit. So there's a list of the audit goals. There's obviously lots of them. There's the strategy. We can help with the strategy. We can help with hardware refreshes. We can help with reducing hosting costs, looking at your S4 future S4 migrations, fix potential SLA issues. Obviously, if you can reduce the size, you can reduce your RTO and RPO, etc. Look at data compliance, financial savings, etc. They probably go on, or we could probably keep listing those on. So there's lots of benefits which come out of this as regards to help your organization understand better those critical risks and issues. So that's the high level process. Then this is the sort of the detailed steps that we go through, and there's actually even more details further in the presentation, which we won't go through now, but we'll be sharing the presentation at the end of the webinar. So it's quite easy. It's 6 steps. Sort of go into a little bit more detail of what we do with each step. So starting with A, logically, we take the licenses. We look at your licenses. So we start performing analysis on your current licensing base, and David will go into this in more detail in the next session. So I won't go deep dive into that. To understand as regards to what licenses you have and what licenses you could potentially save. This is where data management and data archiving, that's when Proceed come in. We look at your current data usage, your growth patterns, etc., and where we can affect change and improvements. SAP support costs have skyrocketed, so we're going to help understand, this is something that BlackDog can do, can help understand how we can better utilize support, maybe to do with upgrades, etc., to get you on a path to reduce those costs. Your SAP application strategy is the next part, so D. So this is how to understand, is define the technical and functional strategy ahead and including of these audits. So this is sort of saying, okay, what's going to be going into the future? Where are you going to go? Are you going to go in S4, etc., or are you going to go just Business Suite on HANA, or are you happy where you are? And then E's SAP infrastructure. Again, if you're going to where you're going to be moving into the cloud, what we can improve there. We can look at different options. So with very much BlackDog are very much looking at it from a cloud agnostic perspective. So where's the best providers to host your systems? And then we look at the spend on SAP and how can we, with licenses and all this put together, what can we affect on the SAP spend, licensing, infrastructure costs, and ongoing maintenance of that. So, and that all feeds into the audit report, the final step, which have all this information in it, built up, and provide you with that sort of cumulative benefit plan. and some areas may have better benefits for you than others, and that's one clear thing that I think we'll talk about at the end. You don't have to take every part of the audit report and implement all of it. We obviously would suggest you do it as a whole, but obviously you may well take parts of it and want to focus in on specific areas. That again can be done. So it's an all-encompassing report or piece of work that you can then take forward either into your business case, as a strategy, etc. So very valuable. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to David now, and he's going to go into a little bit more detail as regards to the licensing review and how that process works. So back over to you, David.
Great, thank you very much, Graham. So one of the largest costs of ownership when it comes to SAP is, of course, your licenses, your bill of materials from SAP. This becomes even more important if you are putting together a business case for S4, because the value of that bill of materials is used directly to understand and project what you need in terms of S4 infrastructure. So it's very important to know which bits you use and which bits you don't use, because you've actually got a very, very unique opportunity to rewrite your bill of materials as you move to S/4HANA. This graphic that you can see in front of you might be familiar to you, because it's actually an SAP graphic, and it describes really the only three methods that SAP have of licensing their software. And it's a very neat graphic, which is why I've used it. So right in the middle of there, you've got your SAP digital core, and then you've got these three areas around the outside: direct human access, indirect access, and the SAP application access. Starting with the direct human access, which is what most people are familiar with SAP licenses. So these are your professional licenses, limited professional, employee licenses, ESS licenses. These are the ones which we're most used to. And with all of these licenses, what tends to happen is that you will allocate a license to an employee based on what you think they might do, whether they might be doing transactions on behalf of the business, raising purchase orders, sales orders. You'd give them a professional license. But generally speaking, many organizations have got relatively poor joiner, mover, lever processes, which means that it's very rare that people actually go back and check, or have an inability to properly check that usage. Are they really using that capability that you've provided to them? So these licenses become muddled, and as they're one of your most costly assets, actually being able to optimize and rationalize these licenses to look back at your real usage requirements can make a massive difference, not just now in terms of avoiding true-up costs, which you might get on your annual audit, but certainly when you go to S4 to truly understand what you need in each of these areas. So when it comes to direct human access, these need to be optimized, because most people are over licensed. They tend to give people a bigger license than they need. So as part of our process, we will optimize these licenses. We will use our behavior profiling to understand every account, what they do in SAP, how often they do it, and based on that information, we can automate the process of optimizing to actually eke out the most value as possible you can get from your bill of materials in this area. The second way that SAP license now is actually relatively new. This was only introduced in 2018, so only a couple of years ago, and really it came on the back of a very high profile case with Diageo of a £54 million bill for direct access, where they'd hooked up a Salesforce system to their SAP system, which was directly creating documents in SAP. And at the time, SAP did not provide any kind of license for that kind of integration and use of SAP. So it came down to, well, the only other option was direct human access. So effectively, this claim was put to Diageo that all the people hanging off their Salesforce system actually need a human access license. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this put a lot of fear into SAP customers, and a lot of pressure from the user groups around the world, especially ASUG and SUG UKI. SAP brought out what they call a digital access. So this came out in April 2018. So this is a method of licensing which is all based on document counts, number of purchase orders created, sales order documents, and there's 9 documents in total. So this allows third-party systems to use processing power in SAP with this special license all based on document counts. Now, SAP have got what they call a digital access adoption program, which is used to encourage people to move to this model if they do have any indirect access. And there's kind of an amnesty where they'll sort of say, look, if you buy a digital access license before the end of 2021, then we'll disregard any, previous access, digital access that you might have had. Now, one of the complexities here is understanding, well, how big a digital access license do you need? How many documents are we creating in SAP? Now, SAP do provide a tool for this. It's called a Passport, which you can download with a service pack within SAP. The main downfall from this tool is that it does require an SAP upgrade. So you've got very short, limited amount of time to be able to use that. And it needs really about a year of information to be able to give you accurate results. So another thing that we can do is actually give you the document counts using our tool without any SAP upgrade. The way that SAP do that count is public knowledge. We've created software based on that public knowledge to do the similar counts, but without needing to do this download of the SAP Passport. So we can also analyze to see, do you need a digital access license? Is it worthwhile to have a digital access license? Could it be replaced, in fact, all your human access licenses? Which is best for you when you move to S/4HANA? Is it to stay on your current contract? Is it to move to a new contract? Because you do have this option to completely rewrite your bill of materials, what they call a value exchange process. So we will certainly check for compliance in that and tell you, A, do you need such a license, and B, would it make sense financially to convert to that kind of license? The third area is a little bit simpler, but it definitely has knock-on effects to the things that Graham and Rob will be talking about, because understanding your SAP application access. So these type of licenses are all based on engine metrics. Usually they're either technical metrics like amount of data being used, amount of core processes on the application, or they could be business metrics. So the turnover of your business, number of employees, these kind of metrics which directly influence the price that you pay for these licenses. But again, we can measure the usage that you have of those licenses against the metrics which you have with SAP. But again, understanding what you use, especially when it comes to master record counts in these, if you've got engine licenses which are all based on master records, then certainly the effect of the things that Graham is talking about in doing that cleansing, reducing down those numbers of master records, can have a massive effect in there. So we can certainly do a analysis in that area as well. Now, there is a fourth way or a fourth big license that you pay to SAP, which does not really appear on this slide, but it's worth mentioning, and again has a big effect, especially when you think of what Graham's talking about and Rob about archiving, and that is your HANA database license itself. So there's two ways that you can buy a license for your HANA database. There's a full use license which allows you to use it actually for any applications, SAP or non-SAP. This is priced by the number of gigabytes that you use. So it's all in memory, so the number of gigabytes RAM that you use. And I think these are available or charged in 64 gigabyte blocks. So obviously reducing the size of your estate by using archiving, understanding what you do and you don't use, can also have a direct effect on the usage of your HANA database, and especially full use where it's all based on gigabytes. Now, the other method that you can license HANA database is what they call a runtime license. So this is only to be used with your SAP applications. And the way that is priced is what they called HANA SAP application value, and it's based on 15% of your bill of materials. So obviously this whole exercise of optimization, rationalizing your SAP licenses also has a direct effect on what the bill of materials you will need going forward and what that 15% adds up to. So in a nutshell, and just as a summary, we can look at all of these different areas, give you a true detailed DNA of how you're using SAP, which allows you to understand what you need going forward. And I'll pass back to Graham.
Thanks, David. Very always interesting that. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little about SAP Data Management and RightSizing. Then we'll move on to BlackDog and Rob. So what I'm going to talk about is the sort of the fundamentals of moving to HANA or to the cloud. We always use the analogy that you're moving from a 5-bedroom house to a luxury studio flat, i.e. you have to just make some decisions on what you're going to move and how you're going to move it. You also have to do a lot of tidying up. And I've just gone for a house move, and I know how this feels. You have to clear out the loft, you have to clear out the garage, you have to do all the things you need to do to move house. And also, when you're moving into a smaller or downsizing, you have to decide, how many beds do you need? You only need the one. So you have to make some critical decisions, because if the only other alternative is to have a bigger luxury flat, which is going to cost you more money, or you're going to have too much furniture in it, and it's not going to be very usable as a luxury studio flat because you're on top of each other. So you've got the analogy does fit. So so how do we do that, and what impact does not right sizing or having the right sizing strategy in place? So this is a typical example of a customer where we went through the right sizing process, and this is the stats and the work that we did with them to understand where we needed to get them. So on the left here, we've got the typical growth of a ERP system. As you can see, it's peaking, troughing. They might have been doing some archiving. They might have made some acquisitions. That's obviously done a big process change in the last couple of years. So it obviously has had an impact on the data growth up to about 25 terabytes. Now their first inkling was, okay, we'll move to S4 HANA, or we'll move to HANA. We can get a compression by using HANA on Business Suite. Now, as you can see, what we then did, we were able then to project the fact is, yes, there is a reduction, but then it will just continue to grow in that new environment as rapidly as it was in the other environment. And within the next sort of number of years, they would soon be back to where they started. So what we with using the right sizing tool and the analysis that we did, we came up with the conclusion that they could archive a significant amount of their data into SAP ILM or into the standard archive, and then they could reduce their growth. And here this is their projected growth, and this is the projected growth with data management. So this is continuing the archiving, continuing to manage the data going forward. And in doing that, we were able to project that they could push themselves into a 3 terabyte system, and they could potentially keep themselves there for at least 4 years without necessarily doing any effort, but then they may have to do some additional work to keep them in that box. So we can provide that. Now from a reporting perspective and a business case perspective, this is quite a compelling view of the world, and will obviously definitely help people understand the strategy and the reasons why you're doing it. So from the audit perspective, what do we require? So what we do is from Proceed, we do this with lots and lots of customers and have done in the past. We essentially can gather some simple data from your system. We have to run 2 SAP standard transactions, and that provides us with enough information to give you at least a detailed understanding of what we can do straight away, where the biggest opportunities are. We have to do some clarification on it because of retention times and residency times. I'm getting into archiving babble now, but yeah, we can then sit down and we can work out where we can affect your total cost of ownership, and also help include this into the 3-way audit, because as David just said, if we feed in the reduction in the data, potentially that he can then be fed into the licensing, and then you can give you the licensing saving. And I think the other critical thing that we need to understand as well is that the savings are not just in the productive system. The savings will be in any copy of those productive systems, pre-prod, QA, DR. They're also reduced. So it's all of a sudden it's across the estate you make the reduction. So we can factor that also into the audit calculations. So this is just an example, I had to say a typical example of an audit we've done recently, which identifies that quite clearly 3 critical areas this customer needs to look at as regards to archiving data. Basis, which is always up there, that's his non-functional data, sort of technical data, IDOCs, etc. Over here we have FICO, which is obviously always heavily used in SAP, certainly SAP ERP, and then sales and distributions. Obviously this is a commercial organization which is obviously selling and distributing products. So there's sort of the 3 core areas, and there's another area here that we've identified as well, SAP Office documents, and that's another interesting one. Is the fact is that certainly if you're going to S4 HANA, we always suggest is that before you do that, you don't store SAP Office documents in your SAP system. You use the standard SAP content repository or another repository like OpenText if you already have it. Now, purely for the fact is that otherwise you'll be using your expensive S4 HANA or your HANA systems to store basically static documents or not unstructured data. Again, it's a one-off change and a one-off migration, and you can take that information out and store it elsewhere. So again, you don't put your PDFs on your most expensive piece of kit in your infrastructure. So this is the more detailed results. This is just really breaking down the information as regards to what can be saved, or what we analysed, what can be archived or is archivable. The simple calculations based on what we can, how old the system is, how much we would retain, i.e. what's the sort of residency policies we would apply, and the residency policies is how much data we would keep in the system. Retention is to do with how long we keep the data for, and that's specific to SAP ILM, Information Lifecycle Management. And then we do some simple calculations, and we can then, as you can see, it highlights to us and to you where the savings can be made. And obviously this also identified the SAP Office information. So this information goes into the report, to which will provide you the end of the process. What we also would be doing as well is having a little look at the tail of applications you may well have in your sitting in your infrastructure, your current infrastructure, and what we could potentially use to decommission. So, and what we mean by decommissioning is taking the data from those old systems, which may be running on old hardware, running in old software releases, which are unsupported, unsecure, and we move them into products either like SAP ILM or into Proceed Seller, and moving that to the new technology, you can still get at the information, you can still access the information, you can still report on it, but you can then also move it into a more economic infrastructure in the cloud, etc. And Rob's going to talk about that in a moment. The key is the fact is that as we're having a look, we look at that tail, and so we can give you a full report in regards to what savings we can make in that area as well. So that's just a high level look at what decommissioning means going forward. So, what I want to do now is hand over to Rob, and he'll talk a little bit about infrastructure and the application strategy. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, David. 2 really compelling areas for cost savings there. Hopefully that's clear for everybody. And we're going to go and complete that jigsaw now with the 3rd one. So that is the impact on your infrastructure from all of these things that you need to do. And obviously we all start out in a very green, happy place when we implement SAP with our SLAs under control and our recovery times under control, and most importantly, our users are happy, and we understand our costs that are coming through. As we sort of grow though, and really the core driver for this is the size of the system. As the system grows, some of your SLAs start to be impacted. Some of your options and even the amount of downtime that is required to do certain things, to modernize, are impacted by the size of your system, because you're carrying maybe a lot of years information that could be archived, or you might have something that could be even deleted. But the general message is, as you move through and start to look at these SLAs and the things you want to do, you're impacted. You can't do them, or they're taking a lot longer than you need them to, or that the business users need them to, and your risk involved there goes up. So take DR for example, taking a lot longer as a test. That means in a real world scenario, you wouldn't be able to get your system back and operational in the time that the business would like, and therefore users are unhappy, the business is unhappy, but also the forecast of where you want to go. So to HANA, or whatever your move might be to a cloud provider, downtime and even moving the system from A to B can take a lot longer. And ultimately all of this impacts our costs of the infrastructure and the cost to manage. So this process is the third part of that jigsaw for this audit, which is to say, look, take some corrective measures ahead of doing some of this more important work, and start to get those SLAs under control, start to bring down those backup and recovery times, and start to impact those things that cost a lot of money. So the largest item certainly in this list, for this example, is a customer, certainly in that second line, is heading towards, with starting with a 20 terabyte system, has to use a physical based machine to run their system in a HANA environment. Yes, we do get compression from HANA, but unfortunately with this example, our starting place is so large that it won't fit into a virtual machine. So we lose a lot of that agility, and unfortunately cost difference between a physical machine and a virtual machine are extreme. From I'd give an example of probably between 500 and £1,000 a month for a virtual machine, versus a single physical machine potentially costing a couple of £100,000. So it means a lot to have your data under control. It means a lot, and the benefits start to speak for themselves as we move through. So our end goal is to get to a place where we can leverage where those financial savings are, and they're going to be from your infrastructure. They're going to be however much cost you would like to put on the business risk of not being able to recover your system in time. But really, this is completing that jigsaw of, let's get control of these SLAs around and our backup times to try and get ourselves to a green status again. It will allow us to do a migration to a cloud provider, or back from a cloud provider even, in a timely manner, so you're not sitting there for a weekend. You're back to a couple of hours or whatever you need it to be, as an example. So that's the goal of this exercise. So what we pull from the audit is really leveraging everything David and Graham have pushed through, and that is and identified, and that is, what are those quantifiable benefits post doing those things. So post archiving, we can shrink the system down, we need less infrastructure, we get our SLAs back. Okay, so the key points to realize these savings. So HANA physical hardware is really expensive. It's all about memory, and unfortunately it's not like the old days of just buying a small server and running this. HANA's very different, obviously, with it all running in memory, and the size of your source database today impacts the size of the HANA box that you're going to have to buy. So the smaller that is, the better. Obviously, SAP want to sell you HANA licenses, so use that to your advantage with the things that we will identify in this audit. We'll make it abundantly clear which are your most you know, your top 5, if you like, throughout the report, which are the ones that you should target, and cover all the other stuff as well, the low-hanging fruit. But certainly the big ticket items will be clear and obvious. Excuse me, if you're already on HANA, this audit can still find savings, and has, excuse me, and has done. There's still lots of stuff that we can find along the way to shrink the system, or optimize your licenses, or change your architecture. Okay, don't forget those business SLAs is a really important one. It often gets missed, or not even, you know, it's not clear to a lot of people in the business what SLAs are breaching at the moment, and what needs to be done about it. But the audit will pull those through. Obviously, HANA doesn't have to be the default for all your SAP systems, so you can use other SAP databases that don't have the same infrastructure requirements or license requirements. We could talk more about that. And savings can still be considerable even if HANA's not planned in yet. So it's highly likely to be so. So we'll find the majority of the benefits if you haven't gone. Yeah, and there we go. So, and then archiving will help performance, backups, restores, as we talked about. And architecture can also deliver additional savings, especially with legacy systems. So all those old systems that you might have kicking around on older versions that you've got on for audit purposes, or because somebody runs a report maybe a few times a year, we can look to optimize those and get that data in the right place so you can still use it, but without carrying the full weight of a system and licenses and maintenance and all those other things that come with it. So let's begin. So that this audit, it's the whole point of bringing us all together as 3 organizations was to drive savings across data, licenses and infrastructure. So hopefully that's become clear from what all the guys and myself have said. We've targeted these areas deliberately because we see customers telling us they're their pain points, and that's where the most of the expense is. The audit drives potential projects based on the findings that we make. So each of us will make a recommendation within this one report about those savings, and make it really clear where they are and what are the biggest ticket items. If one of the items in the report is commissioned, then your audit fee is returned. The project is reduced by the audit, or the project's reduced by the audit fee, either way. And each project that we identify as a cost, it does, unfortunately, and typically those savings will be larger. The savings will be larger, sorry, and it will give you those compelling reasons to move forward. So the focus areas are made clear on best return for the investment that you make. And yeah, that was it from me. I'm going to go back one. Right, back to Graham. And any questions?
Thanks, Rob. Let's thanks for going for that, and David. Yes, so let's this is just a little bit more. There's an extra slide on here which talks about the audit steps in more detail, which we'll share with the slide deck. So they go through it, and then obviously that's the end of the webinar from our talking's perspective. But has anybody got any questions that we can answer? And I don't know whether John wanted to add anything as well. So Michelle, any questions?
Hi, yes, there's a question come through. Can the audit help us with our SAP migration timescales from on-prem to cloud?
Yes, I'll take that one. So it's Rob. Absolutely. If you start out, say, with a 10 terabyte system, and you complete some archiving and reduce that data volume down to, say, 2 terabytes, your cloud migration is going to be a lot faster. Obviously, you're moving physical from A to B, so the leaner that size can be, the better, and that will reduce those migration timescales for you, which obviously means less downtime and impact to the business.
And it also means as well, if you depending on the size of the boxes that are required when you make the move into the cloud. It could be the difference between needing physical or virtual HANA machines as well. So in that instance, it can be a huge cost saving. But you know, anything you can do to save the amount of kind of active storage that you're running in the cloud and the size of the boxes that you require will also help you to save money. So by completing this exercise before the move, and you know, thinking about all of these things as well as the license considerations as well, it can make some pretty significant savings in time and money before moving out to the cloud.
Yeah, and one of the point I'd like to make is we've had a couple of customers who didn't do reduction before they moved, and it became a very expensive exercise because they had to do two things. They were growing inside the HANA world in the cloud, and we had to do the archiving all at the same time. So it was a bit of a double bubble. So always doing it before would be our recommendation.